The mist clings low this morning, wrapping the timbered streets in a pale shroud, muting the world to a hush. Roof beams glisten where the damp has settled, and the cobbles drink the fog as though it were an old, familiar wine. From the eaves, droplets fall in slow rhythm, tapping the rim of wooden pails left by the doorway. Somewhere in the square, a market woman calls out her wares. The sound softened, as if the mist itself wishes to keep secrets. Beneath an open shutter, its hinges dark with age, a young seamstress sits with her work spread before her. Her shoulders are wrapped in a faded shawl, though her hands, pale and slender, remain bare to the chill. Between her fingers, a needle carries a strand of crimson silk through white linen.
Ow!
Drawing it tight, stitch after careful stitch. The thread catches the dim light, glowing like a vein of living fire against the pale cloth. She works without pause, the rhythm of her labor in quiet harmony with the world's stillness. The air here is a mingling of scents, the sour temps of dye vats cooling in the lane, the deep, warm sweetness of rye bread baking in an unseen oven. Beneath those, faint but present, lies the smell of wool dampened by fog, the musk of the earth itself in early spring. Passersby drift close to her small stall, drawn by the careful pattern taking shape under her needle. A spray of roses, their petals turned by wind, the kind that will adorn a noblewoman's wedding veil. Fingers, some rough from fieldwork, others jeweled and perfumed, brush the edge of her cloth, leaving small imprints in its weave. The girl's eyes flicker upward each time, but never quite meet their gaze. Her work is her shield, her words few, her movements deliberate. In her mind she sees the face of the bride who will wear this veil, a woman who will step through the church doors, crowned in blossoms, whose fingers will lift the silk to kiss her lips, whose life may be one of silken chambers or shadowed corridors, depending on the whims of fate and men. The seamstress knows nothing of the bride's name, only that her own name will vanish in the folds of the veil, forgotten before the vows are spoken. A sound cuts through the morning, deep, resonant, unhurried. The bells. The first note trembles in the air, and the mist seems to pause with it. She feels the sound in her chest before she hears it in her ears, each toll pulling her back toward the stone heart of the town, toward the duties that belong to every woman here, no matter her craft. Her needle slows, the thread held taut for a moment, as if she might defy the call. But she does not. No one does. She knots the silk, smooths the linen, and lays it gently aside. Rising, she pulls her shawl tighter, feeling the damp bite at her skin. Around her, the market stirs in answer to the bells. Bread sellers covering their loaves. Children drawn indoors, the voices of men lifting in brisk command. She takes one last glance at her work, the unfinished roses gleaming like small drops of captured summer. Then she steps away from the stall, her feet carrying her toward the peal that rules their days, the sound that has marked every birth, every death, every joining of hands beneath the gaze of God. And as she walks, the mist begins to thin, revealing the path ahead, a narrow way between stone walls that will lead her not only to the church, but into the next chapter of a life measured by the tolling of bells and the work of her hands. The pennants above the marketplace hang limp in the morning stillness, their colors dulled by years of rain and sun. They sway faintly when the wind finds them, like the tired banners of old battles, their threads fraying at the edges. Beneath their faded shade, the baker's daughter stands at the worn table, her hands deep in the yielding weight of dough. She presses and folds, the slow rhythm pulling heat into her arms until they tremble. The flour clings to her hair and lashes, settling like pale frost, softening her dark eyes. Beside her, her mother hums, low and unhurried, a tune older than the walls of the town. It is a harvest song, the kind sung when grain was threshed by moonlight, or when cider was pressed before the first frost. The melody drifts into the air like smoke from a chimney, weaving between the cries of stallholders hawking their wares. The scent of fresh bread rises warm and rich from the oven behind them, mingling with the tang of salt fish, the sweetness of honeycombs, and the earthy musk of wool, still smelling faintly of sheep. The girl's gaze strays beyond her mother's bent shoulders to the wide stretch of the market. She watches the men stand before bolts of cloth, weighing them on the merchant's scales, their fingers judging the weave as though deciding a life's worth. Beside them, Barrels of ale are rolled toward waiting carts, the wood thudding against cobbles. The voices are brisk, full of coin and measure. And no one notices the girl whose hands work without pause, shaping the bread that will feed these same men when the day bends toward hunger. Sound rises suddenly above the noise. The notes of a lute quick and bright. The melody tumbles into the square, scattering the air with its joy, drawing children to its source, as if it were the pied call of summer itself. She feels the pull of it immediately, a tightness in her chest, as though something inside her longs to step forward, to follow where the music leads. In her mind, she imagines it. Her apron cast aside, her bare feet on the warm stones, spinning among the colors and scents, until the whole world blurs into light and song. But her hands do not stop. They press and fold, press and fold. The dough clings to her fingers as the music swells. She hears laughter now, not hers, not meant for her. The bright ring of it carried on the lute's rhythm. The bread must be shaped before the sun reaches its height, before the customers come again. She knows this, just as she knows the music will fade, and that the men and women who dance will not remember her absence. Her mother's song and the lute's melody twist together for a moment in the air, like two threads crossing before parting. Somewhere beyond the market a bell begins to toll, its deep voice marking the turning of the hour. The girl glances toward the sound, her hands still working the dough. The bell will call others to prayer, to meetings, to duties she will never see. When the lute falls silent, the marketplace resumes its steady hum. She dusts her hands on her apron and reaches for another lump of dough. The canopy above her stirs in a brief gust, the pennants lifting just enough to reveal a strip of unclouded sky, a narrow blue opening in the gray. There for a moment before the wind dies again, she looks at it, the smallest hint of a world beyond the market's edge, then lowers her eyes to the work that will carry her to nightfall. The shadow of the guild hall falls long across the cobbled lane, cool and quiet beneath the late sun. Within that shade, the weaver sits at her loom, her body still but for the movement of her hands. The shuttle slips between the warp threads with a rhythm as steady as the breath of a sleeping child, the wooden frame creaking faintly under her touch. Each pass binds another moment of her day into the cloth, another fraction of her life into the pattern. The threads before her shimmer softly, the blues pulled from woad blossoms crushed until their dye bled like deep water, the reds coaxed from madder roots hard won through weeks of soaking, boiling, and rinsing. The air holds their faint, earthy temps, mingling with the dry scent of wool and the sharper smell of oak beams seasoned by years of dust. Light filters through the half-open door, striping the floor with gold, but the loom stands in shadow, as if the work itself belongs to another world, one of patience, silence, and unbroken devotion. Small faces appear at the doorway. Children from the street, their hair uncombed, eyes bright with mischief, lean in to watch the shuttle's flight. Their laughter spills into the room like a draught of warm air, stirring the motes of dust into a dance. She does not look up. The cloth beneath her hands is meant for merchants' wives, for bridal processions, for the kind of feasts where silverware gleams and minstrels sing to noble guests. The fine weave will drape across shoulders that have never bent over dye vats, never bled at the fingertips from the bite of coarse wool. Her own gown is patched in two places, the seam straining where the fabric is thinned. The thread she uses for mending is never of the same color, too precious to waste on herself, so her clothing bears its repairs openly like a ledger of years survived. She knows the garments she makes will be worn only once, perhaps twice, before being stored away. Scented with lavender, guarded against moth and dust, her own will be worn until the cloth itself forgets its shape. From outside comes the faint chime of a bell. A peddler's voice follows, calling of ribbons from Flanders, combs of carved bone, a mirror small enough to fit in the palm. The sound draws the street to life. Shutters creak open. A woman calls to her neighbor. Footsteps quicken on the stones. The weaver hears it all, but does not turn. The day bends toward evening, and her work must be finished before the shadows swallow the last of the light. She pauses only once, resting her hands upon the growing cloth. Her eyes trace the emerging pattern, vines twined with flowers, small and precise, a garden that will bloom for someone she will never meet. Beyond the door, the laughter of the children fades, replaced by the rolling of cartwheels, the closing of market stalls. She knows that when she steps outside, the sun will be low, gilding the rooftops. It's the air carrying the smell of hearth smoke and baking bread. For now, she leans into her shadowed corner, the loom's slow breath her only companion. The shuttle slides once more through the warp, binding thread to thread, hour to hour. As the peddler's bell grows distant, a reminder that the world beyond her door moves on, even as she remains at the loom. Soon, the next chapter will come, born on the sound of footsteps and the scent of the evening air. The courtyard is hushed, though not silent. A low wind stirs the hanging herbs, making them sway gently in the late light, their shadows trembling across the cobblestones. Bundles of sage, rosemary, and feverfew dangle from twine, their stalks brittle, their fragrance rising when the air moves. In the center, the midwife sits before a bench worn pale by use, her hands steady upon a mortar, darkened and smoothed by years of grinding. She works slowly, turning lavender heads and comfrey leaves into a coarse green paste, the pestle's dull thud echoing softly against the surrounding stone. The scent clings to her, the sweetness of the lavender, the earth-heavy temps of comfrey, weaving into the faint smoke drifting from the cookhouse beyond the wall. It lingers in her veil, in the folds of her gown, even in the lines of her hands. Oh, she knows these smells as she knows her own breath. They are the scents of her trade, the quiet markers of a life spent between birth and death, tending to those who stand too close to either. At the gate, young wives hover. Their eyes are lowered, their voices scarcely more than a rustle. Questions slip between them like threads, questions they will not speak aloud beyond this wall, where men's ears might twist them into something dangerous. The midwife does not press them. She lets them linger, lets them weigh their words. She has learned that answers must be earned, not given to every passing fear. The pestle keeps its rhythm, the grinding sound as steady as the breathing of the herbs themselves. A jug of warm cider rests by her bench, the steam faint in the cooling air. She has not touched it. The day has been long, and there is still work to be done. Beside her are bundles of willow bark, the thin strips, coiled like the tongues of sleeping snakes. She sorts them by touch, her fingers knowing which pieces will draw out fever, which will ease the restless pains of the old. These will be traded, not for coin, which she has little need for, but for the quiet debts of the town. A loaf of rye, a bolt of rough wool, a place by the hearth in the coldest weeks. Overhead from the church belfry, a rook calls, a harsh, singular sound that cuts across the stillness. The women at the gate startle, one drawing her shawl closer, as though the bird's voice could chill her bones. The midwife does not look up. She has heard the rook's cry too often to fear it. She knows it will be followed by the toll of the bell at nightfall. The light deepens, shadows stretching over the courtyard stones. One by one, the wives slip away, their steps quiet, their eyes still lowered. When the gate closes, the midwife sets aside the pestle. She gathers the herbs she has ground, the bark she has sorted, and tucks them into cloth packets. Her work will continue by lamplight, as it always does. The flames glow, catching the edges of drying leaves until they look almost like gold. The rook calls again, closer now, as though it has come to watch. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, footsteps sound against the lane. Carrying with them the stories and needs of the next door, she will pass through. Beneath the shadow of the painted arcade, where faded saints look down from flaking plaster, and swallows dart between the beams, she sits alone at her stall. The air is alive with the restless hum of the market, iron-shod wheels rattling over cobblestones. The snap of cloth as merchants shake out their wares, the laughter of children chasing each other between baskets of apples and pears. But the goldsmith's widow keeps her hands steady, the square of linen circling in slow, practiced strokes. Each buckle, each pin, each ring is more than metal. It is memory given shape. She remembers the way her husband's hands would bend over the workbench, lips pressed together in the quiet devotion of craft. Now, she traces those same designs, as if they might warm beneath her touch. The shifting light from the arcade catches the curve of a brass clasp, turning it to gold for the briefest breath of a moment. She tilts it toward the sun, as though letting him see it once more. Around her, the smells of the day mix and mingle, roasted chestnuts turning slowly in iron pans, a drift of sawdust from the carpenter's stall.
Ow.
The faint tang of the tanner's hides curing in the next street over. Somewhere close, bread is being pulled from the oven, and the yeasty warmth stirs a sudden ache in her chest. Across the square, the mummers have begun their play. Brightly painted masks, bobbing above the heads of the crowd, their voices rising in bawdy verse. The air there is loud with cheer, but she does not look up. Joy has not been banished from her, but it sits quietly now, as modest as the widow's veil that frames her face. Instead, her attention remains on the little gleaming shapes before her, each one a coin's worth of sustenance. A young couple pauses at her stall. The man fingers a simple ring, its band engraved with twisting vines. "For your wedding?" she asks softly, the words touched with both blessing and memory. The girl smiles, cheeks warm, and nods. The widow wraps the ring in a fold of cloth, tying it with a thread so fine it could be mistaken for hair. She places it in the man's palm, her own fingers cool and thin. For a moment she feels the echo of her own hand being clasped so many years ago, the same unsteady joy trembling there. The crowd swells as the mummers leap and spin, their bells ringing against the laughter. A lute begins to play somewhere beyond the square, and the sound carries on the wind. Light, bright, unburdened. She listens without turning, polishing one last buckle until it gleams like fire in the dusk. The shadows under the arcade deepen, swallowing the colors of the painted saints above her. She gathers her wares, wrapping them in linen, and sets each bundle carefully into the wooden chest at her feet. Tomorrow the market will open again, and the light will fall differently on the metal in her hands. But tonight, as she lifts the chest and steps out from beneath the painted archway, the music from the mummers follows her, a faint thread of life winding into the darkening streets, carrying her toward whatever waits beyond the next turning.